So now let's come to the US market and to Julia Hughes. Julie is the president of the United States Fashion Industry Association, which represents brands and retailers in the US, also importers and wholesalers. And they are promoting global business basically, because the US brands and retailers get most of their products outside of the US. So thanks again, Julie, for joining us. Thanks also for your flexibility to make the presentation now. And so you heard also some of the questions already posed. Maybe you can also address these. So over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthias, and thanks for the opportunity to join you all today. So let me see if I can do a good job here with Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. And thanks again for the chance to join you today. So let's kind of go through, I promise I'm not going to belabor any of these points, but I do just want to kind of start with what is the approach for our association. And so kind of our tagline is fashion made possible by global trade. So that's really our focus. And that is what we work on for our members. So we focus on communication, education, and advocacy. And obviously in this past year, a lot of our focus has been on the communication and how do we deal with the key issues. So I'm pulling today some highlights from a benchmarking study that we did asking fashion brands and retailers what are they thinking in 2020 for the outlook. And so, as everyone has already said today, COVID-19 is affecting everything, and that's really the bottom line of all of the issues that we're thinking about and talking about. I wanted to share just a couple of slides. So this is a US-centric presentation, so I really appreciated hearing Grant look at the global perspective. So what's happening here in the US? And, I thought these figures that we've been updating every month are, indicative of probably what everyone is seeing in their trends, a very sharp drop in retail sales, a very sharp increase in retail sales. And now we have kind of gone back to, I guess you could say a bit of stability. Although here in the US, we're in the midst of, I'm not sure it's our second wave, maybe it's the end of the first wave of COVID. So we're really seeing, we're not really sure what's going to come next. If we looked at sales in October, pulling the data, I mean, what we are seeing is for fashion products, we're still having a difficult time with sales, although we are expecting a pretty good holiday. But when it comes to, clothing and accessory stores in particular, or department stores, which have been, traditionally leading the way for a lot of fashion product sales, we're still suffering. However, and I'm sharing this slide that we used from our conference last month, what we're hearing on the logistics side is we're looking at cargo volumes that are really surging this fall. So we are seeing kind of that, the resilience and kind of a renaissance in a lot of sales coming in for holiday. So let me turn to sourcing and looking at some of the sourcing insights, which I suspect is probably most interesting for everybody here today. So when we asked, no surprise, every brand and retailer said COVID had disrupted their supply chain for the products that they're sourcing. That's obvious, right? Some concerns were, factories and worker shortages, in part because of the impact of the virus, especially in Asia earlier this year. COVID-19 has made it more difficult to conduct factory audits, especially for those companies who were not using locals for some of their audits because travel is cut back. Many brands and retailers have furloughed and laid off US-based employees. And while in these numbers, we're looking at 68%, my guess is that if we did the survey today, we would see a higher percentage that as companies cut back, furloughs and layoffs were a big part of that. And then, of course, issues of shortages with textile raw materials, which I think that has really seemed to have evaporated, but was a concern earlier on. So the bad news from our survey was, less optimism about the next 5 years. And that's really not a surprise. But we had the lowest amount of optimism or somewhat optimistic in 2020 for respondents, which was 57%. Compared to 92% at the high water mark in 2016. On the other hand, 57% means that more than half of the respondents still were optimistic or somewhat optimistic. And that kind of leads to what I think is the good news, is that in our survey, companies, almost 90% of companies said they're planning to hire more employees in the next 5 years. So despite today, with layoffs and a number of companies going through restructurings and bankruptcy, there still is the expectation that there will be more hiring, although those new hires, I think, are shifting. So the positions most likely for new hiring were sustainability and compliance related specialists and managers, supply chain specialists, which includes logistics, sourcing specialists, and data scientists. And I suspect that number 4 is going to be the area where we're going to have the most competition, but definitely are looking for more new hires. When we talked about the sourcing outlook, what we heard from companies was a sourcing model that remains predominant to the US market, predominantly China, but now China plus Vietnam. So a lot of shifts from China to Vietnam. And what I thought was really interesting is the 29% of respondents who said that in 2020, they were sourcing more product from Vietnam than from China. Although almost every respondent is sourcing from both countries. So we're seeing that shift. And then we also see what happens beyond those two countries, which can't supply everything to everybody, is looking at many other options for sourcing. So there, from a US perspective, there is no one single location that is attracting the new sourcing orders. And interestingly, we're not seeing as much nearshoring in that shift as I would have expected. So I think there are definitely opportunities for new sourcing to the US market. This is probably the most important slide that I'm going to talk about, and glad that everyone will have the presentation later, because it's a snapshot. It's kind of our Yelp scorecard for sourcing, and talking to sourcing executives about how they balance the various issues when they decide where to source. So speed to market, that's obvious. And you've been talking about that today. That's key. Sourcing cost, of course, that has always been a very important criteria. And then the risk factors, risk of labor and social compliance, or risks of environmental compliance. So looking at the compliance side and how is that balanced in the sourcing decision. But the key that we found that most sourcing executives say may tip the balance for where they're going to source, especially from a new sourcing destination, is the flexibility and agility criteria, which is partially an intangible, right? It's very hard to analyze. It's easier to analyze cost issues. It's easier to analyze speed. But flexibility and agility, which really means, I think, the partnership. So are there the partnerships developed, and the supplier and the buyer can work together to shift, whether it's the product type, the fiber classification, the colorways, what are the different issues and how quickly can they adapt? So, and this is where, when we looked at the analysis, perhaps ironically, that, China ranked highest among the sourcing executives for where they were finding that flexibility and agility with their sourcing partners. But that most of the partners were able to be flexible and agile and were average in their rankings. So I think that's really key for us, and I don't want to belabor it too much, but it helps to explain why China and Vietnam, because they are perceived as some of the most balanced, rank so high, but also why for us here in the US, Western Hemisphere, sourcing from CAFTA and from Mexico, both of which can be duty-free to the US as well, there's that balance and that range of meeting those criteria. I want to highlight those sustainability with just a couple of slides, because that remains a key priority that we're hearing from our members. So 70% of the respondents said they're going to allocate more resources for sustainability and social compliance, even in the wake of less optimism and layoffs and cutbacks. There still is a priority focus for sustainability. And not surprisingly, 100% say they audit suppliers and 85% say they're using third-party certifications. One of our partners is PwC, and I wanted to share this slide from PwC's, one of their holiday outlooks this year, because I thought it also helped to focus us on, looking to the future. So in their holiday outlook, talking to younger shoppers, what they found is that for the shoppers between 17 and 38 years old, they definitely saw a higher interest and a higher importance for interest in labor practices, carbon footprint for delivery, and carbon footprint for production. So I think that helps to explain why for most brands and retailers looking ahead, sustainability remains a key criteria. Just a few words about the holiday outlook. So in a normal year, we would say that, by mid-December, this really tells you, are companies going to be successful or not? Are some going to go out of business because they're not going to meet the holiday demand? And holiday this year is more important than ever. So pulling another slide from our friends at PwC, 55% of consumers said they'll spend the same or more this holiday season, which is actually a pretty high number, considering that a little more than half of consumers said in the survey that they do have an impact on their income level from the pandemic. And that's something that, here in the US, I'll talk a little bit about politics at the end, but when it comes to, how has the US really handled the pandemic and how have we worked on stimulus, or how to support workers who are losing their jobs. We haven't perhaps done as aggressive a job as other countries have done. So we definitely see that this is an issue, but we're relatively optimistic that holiday is still going to be good, particularly with the expectation that we're not going to be able to travel as more states and jurisdictions are heading into lockdowns in these current weeks. No surprise that, online shopping is the way that most people are shopping this year. I think that would have been happening anyway. But if you're not going to go out to a store, you're nervous about spending much time in a store with other shoppers, obviously online is the way to go. So what next in the US? Briefly, we're very focused here right now on politics, right? We have a new president that will take office on January 20th, but we have a current president who is still actively fighting against that, the election decision. So, unlike perhaps normal times when the lead story in our news should be COVID or should be the economic response, it's really very much focused on politics. And so what's happening right between now and January is really critical, and it has an impact on our sourcing decisions because the Trump administration is still taking actions on trade policy and proposals to put more tariffs on products from new countries before they head out the door next month. And I think, from a US perspective, it's hard to kind of overestimate the impact that that's having on sourcing decisions today. And I do think that that is inhibiting what might have been perhaps an expectation that with the vaccines and with moving forward in the fight against COVID, that we should be starting to rebound next year, and therefore companies need to be placing orders today for those sales. I want to also say just a few words about China because, often when I'm talking with sourcing executives here in the US or talking with industry groups around the world, there's a lot of focus on China because China is the dominant force in the sector. And that certainly is true. It's true right now. And even in the import data that we have to the US, China is holding on to their spot as the top supplier of apparel to the US market and accessories to the US market, even with what we see as the shifts for companies wanting to diversify their sourcing portfolio away from China. On the other hand, China is also a political target here in the US. And so with additional tariffs on imports from China, that makes the cost higher, even though the unit values are going down. With currently the focus on forced labor practices in China, that's having an impact on companies on where they're looking to source, and also really increasing their risk assessment, looking at forced labor issues. I think that is, for the future, something that is going to have a major impact on sourcing portfolios and how much product is coming from China. So what to watch for politically here in the US? We have a pending action against Vietnam in an investigation that's similar to the action that led to the 25% tariffs on imports from China. The Trump administration has rushed. So normally these investigations could take up to a year. However, the Trump administration is holding hearings on the Vietnam actions at the end of this month. And there's a real possibility that they may take action against Vietnam before they leave office. Once again, that's a disruption to the supply chain that companies are concerned about, but also an opportunity clearly for all of you on the line to look at the potential for new partners here in the US. The Trump administration also is mulling actions against the EU and against France for the digital services taxes. That is going to have an impact potentially on the relationship between the US and the EU. We have trade programs that the Congress has to renew or else they expire at the end of this year. And while the US GSP program isn't like Europe's, it doesn't cover apparel and most accessories. It is important for many brands and retailers for their hard lines. So that has an impact as well on sourcing options. And miscellaneous tariff bill, which is a very technical program that I won't bore you with right now, but it does allow some duty-free benefits. So what this really means is that we are fearful, we are anticipating there could be disruptions to some of the normal sources of supply to the US market. And that does give some opportunities for all of you in MENA to potentially expand some of your business or make some new connections here in the US. Last thing, we're going to see a lot of new trade policy initiatives under the Biden administration. And, I encourage everyone to think about and please share with us if there are thoughts that you have about things that could be done or opportunities that you see. My expectation is that the Biden administration is not going to jump in and start negotiating new free trade agreements on day one. They're not going to propose rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership on day one. They're going to take a more measured approach. But I think initiatives, particularly those that can wrap in sustainability improvements improvements in climate change policy, both areas where we anticipate there will be a major shift in US policy compared to the Trump administration. There will be some opportunities there. And then obviously the COVID-19 response. So, we haven't done a great job here in the US. There's a lot of expectation that with the Biden administration coming in, consumers are going to feel more confident on a path forward. Nothing's going to change overnight, but with vaccines and with perhaps a more organized whole of government effort against COVID, and focus on reopening the economy, that we will see some really positive results in the second half of 2021. So let me stop there. I hope there will be questions and look forward to fielding them. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Julie. Also very comprehensive overview of the US markets, some consumers, the politics. I think politics are very important also. We saw this morning also in the statistics that at least China is losing some market share. They have a big chunk, so it's a big thing to take over, more than others. So maybe this might be an opportunity earlier. We also discussed, we had the vice president of the China National Textiles and Apparel Council with us. He also said, yes, we're looking also inside. We also look into investment outside, and to see how we can then also tackle our major markets. You said China plus Vietnam plus others, but maybe with the political movements against China, well, not against China, but the thing on Xinjiang cotton and forced labor, the tariffs, also the tariffs maybe on Vietnam, that opens up some opportunities for other countries. So I open the questions to everybody. I think we have one in the chat in French. There are two in the chat in the question and answer box in French. I just read it quickly. So he talks about investment. Is there opportunities for American investments for the future of Africa? I would put this a little bit differently and see how do your members see sourcing from Africa, the MENA region, but also Africa, sub-Saharan Africa as a whole.
I mean, that's a great question. And, actually our members are very positive about sourcing in Africa. I mean, we do have a duty-free program, AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act, that's in place until 2025. And we definitely have members who are committed. There's particularly the cluster in Ethiopia. There's been a lot of growth in Kenya. We've been talking with other groups. So it's very positive about Africa. Investment, I mean, one of the trends that we still see a lot here in the US is that the US brands and retailers are less likely to want to invest. They want to have their partner, the manufacturer, make their investments more than the brand directly. But people are very positive about Africa. The issue right now, I think, is that, the capacity is not yet there. There's a lot of interest in more programs for training in Africa. How can we be helpful, particularly on the logistics side, to improve some of that speed to market, but definitely very upbeat and positive support for expanding in Africa.
Okay, good. So, you mentioned also, there's another more questions coming, but I just want to pick up on this. You mentioned that nearshoring, you can't really see that much on nearshoring, at least with regard to Western Hemisphere. Would you also regard the North Africa as a potential area for nearshoring? And talking about Egypt, we're talking about Jordan, which is not technically Africa, but nevertheless it's close by, and also Morocco, which has a free trade agreement with you. So do you see there some potential coming up?
Well, and that's why I might not use the word nearshoring then, but absolutely there's a lot of interest. These are difficult times for everyone, for brands and for consumers. So the focus on cost is there. So having duty-free options is really valuable. And that is where Morocco, Egypt, Jordan, that have free trade agreements already with the EU, well, Egypt doesn't have a free trade agreement, but it has the program, the qualified industrial zones that allow duty-free access to the US market. I mean, that's huge. That is a big benefit that probably not as well utilized. That's a whole other presentation. I could talk about why, some disappointment that it's not utilized more, but a lot of interest in looking at duty-free sourcing options. And of course, then there's Western Hemisphere, the free trade agreements that we have here. And when I say it's disappointing, it's that there was some expectation among my friends in the Western Hemisphere that a lot of the business would move from China direct to Western Hemisphere. And that hasn't really happened. Many of the orders have moved within Asia or South Asia. I think, we're almost a year now into the COVID impact. And so there's an expectation there will be more nearshoring to Western Hemisphere. There are some companies that are trying to also enhance the made in USA, actual production in the US. And that's something that the Biden administration has said they're going to try to support through incentives as well. So I think all of those are important opportunities, and definitely there are buyers who are interested in looking at them, especially duty-free.
Good. There are a couple of more questions in writing here. Just back to Africa, or still in Africa. In your opinion, do you see a future in AGOA? Will it be renewed?
The Trump administration started free trade agreement talks with Kenya, and that kind of sent a shiver down the spines for many folks who are AGOA supporters. Were they going to try to peel off from AGOA, which is a unilateral preference, but also not permanent, and try to go country by country? I don't expect AGOA to go away. I think certainly in a new administration, they will be supportive for renewal before we get to 2025. But what that looks like and what the criteria will be is going to be a big discussion in the next few years. But I would not, look, there are no guarantees because it needs renewal, but for sure, I anticipate that it would be renewed.
Okay. Can I just pose my own question in between? Because we had a presentation, a very interesting presentation from Bangladesh also this morning. Maybe you can look at this when you have some time and you post the recordings.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a little too early for me.
No, I'm not blaming you. I just wanted to really refer to this. And but he said some of our companies, he was from BGMEA, some of our companies have invested in Ethiopia. And now we are very much not only disappointed with regards to brands and retailers of what they are what the order cancellation, all this with Bangladesh, but specifically also in these investments we made in Ethiopia, in an African country. And now we are having problems because many of the brands and retailers, some of them, your members, have just canceled the orders.
I mean, this is a really big issue, and because we agree, and our position is that if brands and retailers need to work with their partners when orders need to be canceled or when shipments need to be deferred. So, we don't endorse that. We recognize the pressure that puts on manufacturers and the entire supply chain. I will say that, for right now, immediately, because of the political situation in Ethiopia, there definitely are some concerns about that. Although, some of our major members have made commitments to Ethiopia, and they're not going to walk away from those commitments. So I think, assuming that the political situation is under control, that we'll go back there. I mean, same with Bangladesh. I mean, there's a lot of enthusiasm of sourcing in Bangladesh, and companies that have worked very closely, for the past several years through the Accord and through the Alliance on some of the practices in the factories and safety in the factories there, that I don't see companies walking away from that either. But I recognize it has been very, very tough times, and not every buyer has necessarily handled the situation as well as they should have.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a tricky question, but
Yes.
we actually starting next year a small project on looking into governance structure of global value chains and see whether there is a possibility to find a third way or a more, whatever that means, fairer way of collaboration between. And I would be happy if US FAA also would like to join the discussion. It's basically a dialogue between the different parties.
Actually, I'd be happy. I mean, I think that is really critical. And, you know, for many companies, you know, if we go back 20 years, we had a different world of letters of credit and other mechanisms that, you know, really held every, you know, were legally more binding than where we are today. You know, on the other hand, if you're going bankrupt, you know, then it's a situation that's really hard to deal with. So I think that would be terrific to kind of look for those types of mechanisms.
Great. Still some more questions coming in there. They're all in French, so I just have to read them first. There's one from Tunisia, and the question is whether you think that the new administration would also look, is there a possibility of the administration to look on Tunisia and kind of negotiate a similar agreement which you have, for example, with Jordan or a Swiss arrangement, because Tunisia is very much interested also in the US market.
You know, there was an initiative a number of years ago, exactly looking at a opportunity with Tunisia. And that's why I did want to kind of leave the door open. I mean, depending on what the industry is interested in and what your government is interested in, I do think there may be some opportunities for enhancements, and whether it's new agreements or perhaps, you know, docking onto an existing agreement, or for those countries that already have an agreement for an expansion and some reassessment of the agreements. Whenever we have a new administration, that's an opportunity, and I would, you know, highly recommend that discussion. And I'm happy to chat with anybody who would like to, you know, if they think that there is that interest. I mean, the U.S. is a tough negotiator, though, so, you know, it's not for the faint of heart to say that you want to try to negotiate an agreement. There will be a lot of commitments there, but I do think there will be a desire in the new Biden team to do things differently. So it's a time to really to look at what those opportunities could be.
Great. Some other question in a different topic, but again in French. What is it's regard with the demand side on the US market. What segment of the market in the American apparel sector has been most affected by the pandemic?
Well, obviously, so we have some members in the tailored clothing segment, so suits, jackets. I would say that they've been the most impacted, and they really had to make the most shifts in the type of product that they were producing, because when we're on Zoom, well, you don't need a new jacket every time for your Zoom call, and you're definitely not buying a suit to wear. You're probably not wearing a tie. So I would say it's the segment for tailored clothing, you know, which has always been a very, you know, popular and, you know, effective segment. That's probably the worst hit, you know, and those people who are most successful are, you know, comfortable wear, casual wear that still looks professional.
Like this one.
Like that.
There's one question from Zoe, which a little bit on the US, not market, but on the economy a little bit. You talked about the impact of the downturn on the labor force. Could you elaborate to what extent this impacts the different men and women? So is that different? Can you see something on the gender aspect here, or not really?
Not really from the data, not really data-based, okay? You know, and kind of looking at what's happening in sourcing to the US market. And I went through a lot of the sourcing statistics and decided not to necessarily add any of those to the presentation. because it kind of, takes us down a different path that could be a lot of discussion. But, things, wool products, more formal wear, that's doing terribly. Men's versus women's, women's has always been higher value. And I think that, women's is probably doing in general a little bit better than menswear. But that's kind of a long discussion. So I don't think I'm really going to answer your question very well right now. But if you email me, I'm happy to kind of talk with you more about it.
Okay, we have one more question and also one hand raised from someone who's anonymous. Our manufacturing company is REP certified, GSV compliant. Do you recommend, now it's gone, under this. Do you recommend any trade show, online platform, agency for prospecting in the US? Or it will all be virtual?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, normally when we're talking about, marketing and how to reach US buyers, for sure, trade shows is a pretty critical aspect. And I heard just yesterday that one trade show is thinking that they're going to try to do something in February in person. But I have to tell you, from what I'm hearing from brands and retailers, people aren't going to be traveling anytime soon. And at many companies, they cut the travel budgets in part because of the financial restructuring that they needed. But, COVID is still hot and getting hotter here in the US. We're hopeful that we will be able to have a face-to-face meeting in the fourth quarter of 2021. But until then, we're planning on staying virtual. I know some trade shows are thinking, particularly Magic in August, looking at whether they could do a real trade show in August. I hope so, but for us, we're taking a pretty cautious perspective, and we're looking at the last quarter of next year for when we're meeting in person again. Okay.
Do you have any indication from your members whether they see this virtual trade show something that they are really looking into, that using as a sourcing base?
Yeah, sorry, let me respond to that part of the question. Yes, absolutely. People are going to the virtual trade shows, and if it's easy to navigate, they are looking at the booths and looking at the information in the virtual trade show. We've done presentations at a number of the shows, to kind of also help to drive, traffic, and people are interested in more information. But it's definitely not the same. And in some of the trade shows, and I'm not trying to promote one over the other, but, for example, if we're talking about denim and Kingpins, that kind of is the premier show. They're also partnering with a organization that does digitization of the inputs. And I think that may be a way to go that is going to prove successful as well, where you can't be in person and you're not able to touch and feel the product that somebody has, but you're able to see all of the specs. You're able to know, like the person who asked the question, what certifications you have, because that makes a big difference to know that, all right, if you're RAP certified, I know what criteria that you've met. So I think it's a great fallback for what we have to deal with today, but I know everyone's looking forward to being in person again.
Great. There are no more questions. Well, there's one. There's also one. I would like to give, Jana, if there's one hand raised from Sohel Kabir, can you give the microphone?
Yes, he's ready. Go ahead.
Hello, Matthias. Thank you so much. And also, Julia, thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Sohel Kabir. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm representing an apparel manufacturer here in Bangladesh. I'm the sourcing lead of the company and mainly responsible for sourcing new business. Mm-hmm. We are actually searching for new customers for our newly extended capacity. Uh-huh. And I like to share my experience when I tried to communicate with US retailers for this purpose. I have communicated with around 20 retailers in USA, starting from the leading brands to comparatively smaller ones in the last 2 months' time. One of the leading retailer, which I do not want to mention here, sent us a feedback that they can only start business with us if we have experience of working with US retailers, along with 4 other terms that we do not comply with at this moment. Currently, we are working mainly with UK, EU, and South American customers, one from South Africa, and unfortunately, no experience of working with US retailer. So it became really difficult for me. And to go further, I communicated with the sourcing people of smaller brands, but they did not really respond in that level. So I feel this a little difficult to enter into the US market. And my question is there any tip for me or any clue for me how I can do this thing more easily?
I mean, thanks
Sorry,
for
it was a little longer.
all right. I mean, that's a tough question, but for your particular experience, what I would suggest is that because you're already working with UK and EU producers, the easiest way to get experience to the US market is to work with some EU and UK companies that are selling to the US market, right? So, you know, expand the relationship that you have, or expand to producers who are going to already know you, who have a foothold in the US and are selling in the US. Like that's probably the easiest way. I mean, you're right, brands and retailers. I mean, I showed you the scorecard to kind of give you a sense of it, but they are definitely taking a deep look at new suppliers. It's not easy. It's not, you know, a few years ago, it might have been easier to become a new supplier, but I would say now, particularly when brands can't travel to visit your facility necessarily, or you know, have that opportunity to meet you in person. So yeah, I agree. It's tough. If you can get experience to the US market, then that really does open doors for you. Otherwise, I think, you know, some of these digital, the virtual trade shows can help to meet people who are looking to expand their business, right? I mean, that's kind of the model. Whereas a lot of the retailers they're not looking to expand their business yet. Like they're not necessarily in that recovery mode, like some smaller brands or niche brands might be. So I realize that's not a satisfying answer to you, but you know, don't give up hope, because I think we are in a real transition right now.
Okay, no, it's okay. Thank you so much.
Of course.
It will help.
Great. Any other hands raised? Not yet. There's one last question in the box, which is easy to read, difficult to answer. Any other trade shows known other than Magic in the US market? You mentioned denim kingpins.
Oh yeah, I mean, so well, I don't want to miss anybody. So I mean, there's Tex World, which traditionally is a New York-based show. And we participated in their virtual trade show. There's also apparel, textile sourcing that used to meet in Miami and in Canada. And they've also done a digital virtual exhibit floor as well that we've participated in. So there are multiples. You know, I don't, if they want to tell you, Matthias, who they are, or if you'd like, I can just share with you contact information for those shows that we know. You know, that'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be good. I think one easy thing is you just add another slide on your presentation, and then
Exactly.
we put this presentation anyway on our slide. People can see it, and then they can also see the contact details there.
We'll definitely add that.
Great. So last call, last chance. Any questions? Any hand raised? I don't really see it. So that brings us to the close of your presentation. It was a great presentation. As I mentioned, also you see all the questions coming in. Very much interested in the US market, also for those traditionally exporting to the EU. Yeah. Perfect. So this also brings us to the end of our webinar today. So thank you very much. We will make the presentations available on our website. We will also make the recording available on our website so that you can listen again to some of the presentations if you want to rehear it, or if you couldn't be with us the whole day, you then can also specifically look into specific topics that were of interest to you, whether it be from Bangladesh, from China, from the European market, or the US market, or others. I will answer a question for VJoy separately, which I see on the screen. So thank you very much, everybody, for your kind presence, attendance. Thank you very much for our panelists this morning and also this afternoon. Some of them are still with us. So thank you very much for all the good work, the great presentations, and hopefully you also got something out of it. I think I personally got a lot out from the different presentations, and I think our beneficiary stakeholders, whether it's being enterprises or institutions or government people as well. So thank you very much. I will be in touch individually with the panelists. Thank you very much for the attendees for being with us the whole day. But I think it was a worthwhile day. Thank you and goodbye.